thank you everybody for showing up. This is the first of many future events. This is related to Near Nordic, so if you are not here for Near Nordic, you're in the wrong place. But first I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Taylor Ryan. I'm the CEO of Near Nordic, Clint, and Growth Secrets. And I've been building a bunch of these other companies in the process. I'm a 6-time startup founder, originally from Washington, D.C., but I've been out here in Denmark for 6 years and 4 months and like 12 days. Who's keeping count, right? I was a finalist for Ecosystem Hero of the Year, and that was because I was running a lot of in-person events. I really dig this stuff. Part of the reason I was so scattered with the intro was like, shit, I ordered too many pizzas! So like I was calling up the pizza place, and I'm thrilled that people actually came out, so this is awesome. Some of the things that I've done here in Denmark, some companies that people might recognize. I ran the marketing for Planday, Geniebelt, Actimo, and Valuer. All of those companies have had exits, so 1 IPO, 2 acquisitions, 1 merger. I'd like to think I know a little bit about growth hacking, and basically getting things off the ground. I've worked, as my agency is concerned, Clint, with all these different wonderful companies, and it's been an absolute blast to work with really smart people. I've also been working with a lot of different accelerators, some local, some international, and that's been incredible to kind of see how the wheels turn in different scenarios and different verticals, and it's been great. And I also came on board with a company called WeGrow. It was originally cannabis meets crypto, which has its own kind of weird connotations because it's in the world of vice, and there's a lot of interesting things that come out of it. Now it's complementary alternative medicine because they wanted to add mushrooms to the mix. So I'll be covering a lot of ground today, like a lot, and I'm going to try to keep it, again, to a tight 45 and leave people with some thoughts. The whole point of today is to get people thinking and get people to connect with one another. That's what this is all about. And hopefully before the end of the night, you've made at least 1 or 2 new connections. Maybe these are investments, maybe these are future co-founders, who knows? So before I get into the actual presentation, I just briefly wanted to touch on the Near Nordic Accelerator. Near Nordic is based off of the Near protocol. I've been working with those guys on a number of different interesting projects through a DAO, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I'm going to throw out a shitload of buzzwords, so get ready. But basically, there's 3 successful elements to every really good accelerator. And for those that are new to kind of this scene, an accelerator is basically an organization that takes startups that are relatively early and gets them accelerated for growth so that they can either be invested in or they go somewhere. The idea is that I want to focus on 3 major areas within the world of startups, which is basically startups, growth, and investors. And the Near Nordic program is really straightforward. It's basically 2 different cohorts over the span of the year. So you have a fall and a spring, 1 online accelerator, community building, which is what this is, and basically a 12-week cohort per each of these with 60 modules and 50 exercises. And the idea is that we're looking between 8 and 10 startups per cohort. So if you are interested in getting involved with that, please connect with me on LinkedIn. There are all kinds of crazy incentives that go into this game. The space that we're in right now with Web3, there is just money being shoveled in hand over fist. So there's lots of incentives to kind of make that work. I also run Layer 3 Ventures, which is a VC fund for Web3. And there's all kinds of interesting goodies in that. That is basically for dApps, decentralized applications. So again, the things that are needed in order to make a really nice accelerator is basically growth, startups, and financial. This has been in my background. This is my bread and butter. This is basically getting nice results. The big thing as a startup that you're really after is revenue and monthly active users. In terms of finding startups, I've worked with an AI company that I'm not going to talk about, but basically help them scrape startups from all over the world to create reports for large organizations. Investors. So investors, and I know that there are a few in the audience here, the idea of expanding the networks of potential investment for these startups is a huge part of making sure that everybody's successful in this game. So this is basically the entire ecosystem that collapses into Near Nordic. The mission of Near Nordic is quite simple: discover, train, support, and ultimately launch the next generation of successful Layer 3 dApps in the Nordics. And I will explain what those are in future slides. But these are the main values, and I know I'm cutting it off a little bit, but it's ethical and sustainable, which basically is almost what everything in Web3 is coming to be, and I'll explain why that is. Execution beyond everything is what I focus on, get shit done. Traction beyond all other things, so show numbers, KPIs. We have global ambitions. I realize Denmark is a lovely place, 5.5 million people. There's a whole fucking world out there. So to make something work here is nice, but the rest of the world matters. And support beyond everything else as well, and making sure that these founders get the resources they need. We are building utility-focused apps. I'm not as eager to get into the world of NFTs. I think they're super interesting. It's just very, very early. So I do move fast, and I am recording all this. So if I go over something that you didn't quite catch, not a big deal. This will be published later. My whole goal for doing this and being involved in this is, well, multifold, but I want to provide value. I want to make sure that people leave here with either something that they can use or something that is immediately interesting that then they can at least wrap their mind around, because there's so much, I guess, misinformation inside of Web3. So I have a pretty good understanding of the people that have signed up to come to this, but I'm curious, how many people are currently in Web3 right now as founders? Nice. Okay, how many people are investors? All right, cool. And how many people have never owned anything crypto related and are just more curious than anything else? All right, good, cool. All right, it's a pretty interesting ratio. All right, so I'm going to go into some of the educational stuff because I think it's super relevant. Even if you're super deep in the crypto space, this still counts. And I think it counts for a number of reasons, because we don't want to come off as the crazy person. So like, we've all met this dude at a party or a gathering where it's like, oh, you don't know about Bitcoin? And people are like, God, get me the fuck away from this guy. I'm that guy. And it's so frustrating because I've come into an understanding of what it actually means for the future and how it's going to affect all of us. And the way that I often try to get people to understand what this is like is maybe thinking of it as either a new sport or a new game that everybody can play. And if that doesn't work for you because you don't like sports, then fuck it, fine, Netflix. Like, everybody's got some television show that they discovered and they're into, and all of a sudden you start learning characters. And you start learning the reasons why characters exist. Now, the missus invited me to watch this show, and it's not my show. I'm not into this show. Like writhing on the couch, like, this is the worst. But, that's her thing. And so maybe in Web3, you might be really into the metaverse or really into crypto. But maybe doing anything related to DeFi is just not your jam. So the idea is that maybe you start to look at this as a new show where you can recognize good and bad characters relatively easily, notable moments of glory, or at least things that are like, wow, that's interesting. Success and failures, jargon terms, all those things take place. There is a big difference between Web3 and TV, and I'm going to harp on this stuff for a while, but this will affect a lot of businesses, many over the next 5 to 10 years. This is personal finance and business finance, and I'm going to show a video at the end that I think just articulates it super well. It's not going away. The other thing that I find that people have difficulty latching onto this is it's really just understanding systems. I've always said that marketing is all about systems. And once you understand one node, one part of the system, you can start applying the learnings across the different areas. So for me, it was content. I loved making video content. I loved making long blogs that nobody read, but the idea was that opened up the doors to understanding SEO and some of the technical sides, which then led to running digital ads and social media. So if you latch on to one area and start to understand it, I think there's a lot of interesting things that can pour out of it. So let's take a look at the Nordics, because that's what I'm focused on with this accelerator. The first thing is, I realize that nobody wants to kind of play together, but let's just pretend for today. So this is the population of the Nordics. If we combine Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Iceland, why not? 366,000, it matters. So So the idea is that is 27.46 million if it was just lumped into one big country. But GDP-wise, it's gigantic. Now, I don't know how Russia's doing these days, but I don't think they're making the same amount of money as they used to. So if the Nordics were combined into one country, they'd probably be at number 12 right now, which is ginormous. That's crazy big. And the Nordics have a couple of really interesting things that are happening and going for them. So they have the Global Entrepreneurship Index, Sustainability, Investment Per Capita, Happiness Index, which is what that is, higher education. They stand out in the top marks for pretty much all of these categories. And you can't say that about any region in the world. And this is an interesting diagram, or chart showing the European Tech Commission investment. And they compare, if you added them all up, almost to London or the UK. And there's unicorns that have come out of here. Like, let's not get it twisted. Per country, there's been a lot of billion-dollar companies that have done some pretty amazing things. And there are these crazy things called soonicorns, companies that eventually will surpass that $1 billion valuation. It's a thing, right? And this place is super unique, at least in my eyes as an American, because I had $45,000 worth of student loan debt as soon as I got out of school. They actually give you money to go to school here, which is crazy. So they attract a lot of big and interesting players that could be amazing founders or investors of the future. And the idea of like investment per GDP is here, and you can't really see it because there's people there, but it's something to think about. Here's the interesting rub. This is basically the percentage of the population that owns crypto and basically the adoption rate of the total percentage of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, and Iceland. Less than 1% in many cases, or less than 2% in many cases, which is shocking. I was speaking over at Maersk Growth last Friday, and out of a room of about 40 people, 30, 40 people, there was one that actually owned any crypto assets. I have a feeling that's going to change, and I'm going to address why that is. But the big picture is the potential for early mass adoption of blockchain technology, especially within the Nordics, has never been higher. So let's go over some terminology so that we're all kind of playing from the same baseline and we have an area to kind of grow from. I'm going to back out and show this video because I think it articulates really well what most people hear when somebody starts talking with crypto jargon and vernacular. First couple of seconds, you're like, all right, I got it.
Automation's world headquarters, research has been proceeding to develop a line of automation products that establishes new standards for quality, technological leadership, and operating excellence.
I follow you so far.
With customer success as our primary focus,
who doesn't love that?
We've been proceeding on the crudely conceived idea of an instrument that would not only provide inverse reactive current for use in unilateral phase detractors, but would also be capable of automatically synchronizing cardinal gram meters.
Lost, right? Done. And that's most people as soon as they start throwing in any vernacular within crypto. It's just the game. And it's super frustrating because there's an entire language based around this stuff, and it's new. It's so new that nobody knows how to speak this language, or very few. So the idea was like I tried to sit down with the missus before I was doing this presentation to kind of get a baseline of what most people would understand. And so I was like, okay, well, do you know what the blockchain is? And I got this expression. And so it's like, okay. So then I explained it's a system in which a record of transactions are maintained across several peer-to-peer networks. And again, this reaction. So the idea is that maybe, as Chris had put it, within an ecosystem and within kind of a timeline, you understand the differences of what Web 1 was, which was basically like, hey, we got the internet. And until Google came along, people were basically saying like the internet's, I guess, cute, but like you can't find anything and there's no purpose in ever of having it. Until Google came along, and then all of a sudden we have the ability to search and find things. Social media was supposed to be this thing where everybody was individualistic and we could create all these things, but none of these platforms talk to each other. Web 3 is basically decentralized everything, and everything talks to everything, which is super interesting. So what you end up getting is super interconnected spaces with also the financial side tucked into it. I'm going to quickly go over some of the technical terms and that's related more to crypto and NFTs, and then I'll skip ahead to something that's a little easier to kind of be more palatable. So there's a difference between a token and cryptocurrency. Real quick definition of cryptocurrency is basically a digital payment system that doesn't rely on banks to verify transactions. A token is basically an asset that's underneath one of those. Within NFTs, like this is a whole different thing. You covered a ton of NFT stuff, so I'm not gonna like stay on it forever. I think it's fair enough. Let's take a walk. I wanna show the way that I think most people are missing the big picture in crypto using metaphors. So this is a history of aviation and showing that this is kind of some of the earliest ways that, and the reason that we developed all these things is we wanted to drop shit on people's heads. Like that was the goal, So the idea was, we had to develop these things that got better over time, and by the end of it, you're looking at the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is the most expensive piece of technology meant to ultimately drop things on people's heads. This is basically the crypto landscape as it pertains to utility and also the reason why some of these maybe used to exist and don't exist anymore. And you have to start thinking like this was more of a passenger jet or plane versus something that was immediately made for fighting in the air. The same thing is true of many cryptocurrencies. And also many of these shouldn't exist. The reason why people own Bitcoin is beyond me, and I'm going to go into a lot of debates on that, I'm sure, but it's baffling. One of my favorite pictures of all time is basically these two side by side. These are only separated by 66 years. A couple of guys on a beach in North Carolina with a plane that's made out of matchsticks essentially and some canvas, and Neil Armstrong on the moon. 66 years of difference. We're going to see the same thing with technology when it comes to Web3, and it's like taking the Wright brothers and their first plane against the F-35. We're seeing that now, and it's one of those crazy things. I don't believe that Bitcoin is going to be the future. I might be alone in this room in saying that, but this was created in 2008. You've seen 6 updates total. I don't own very many things technology-wise that was built in 2008. I don't know about you guys, like maybe a DVD player that I threw out years ago. Like, what else do you have? But it's really frustrating to see the growth of that in the face of Moore's Law. Has anybody heard of Moore's Law before? Cool, a lot of people. So Moore's Law is basically the idea that technology doubles every year, and now it's like 1.5 times every year, because the number of transistors that can exist on a board allows it to basically get smaller in order to have more and more and more speed. And there's a really interesting way of looking at the speed of transactions, just comparing Ethereum, which is on the left, with Bitcoin on the right. And you'll basically see that, oh, one is definitely faster than the other. They use South Park characters to basically do that, and I thought it was brilliant. So I'm just going to show this really briefly. Let me back out. Cool. So you get the idea of basically these are nodes, and you're getting shipped much faster versus a very long line of transactions. So in order for me to make a transaction happen using Ethereum, let's say I'm trading 1 ETH. I could pay upwards of $200 potentially in gas fees. If I were trying to transact on, let's say, Near, I'd be paying 0.00001 cent. Like, the differences are baffling. So I don't know why people would continue to use those technologies, because they're just so old. Cool. So I am going to jump on to the next thing. The screen gets a little wonky with switching. All right, so let's look at some of the past and current shifts and why crypto will probably end up being in our lives within the next 5 years, certainly within the next 10. So I used to see like all these pictures of Roman coins online, and I could see that like the edges were shaved off. I just thought that was because they were old. I didn't realize that, no, this is what merchants used to do. In order to make a little money on the side, they would continue to chop the edges of the coins off in order to make more money, or they would mix them with different metals, and eventually it devalued everybody's currency. We're starting to see that in different places now, but the idea is that there's this thing called fiat currency. Fiat is the Latin word which basically means determined by authority. So these are government authorities that are basically saying this is worth whatever. $1 is worth this amount of gold. The gold standard is what it was known as. Well, let's take a look how that's doing. So just within the last year, 23.6% of all US dollars that were ever created were printed. What the fuck does that mean for the dollars that I still have in my bank account back in the US? Well, I can tell you, bing, yeah, you nailed it. Inflation. I couldn't find an up-to-date chart, and I had to make my own line because it's continuing to go up. That's crazy. So we're seeing that in massive scale right now. We haven't seen that level of inflation ever, especially within the US. Here in Denmark, oddly enough, the amount of money that people are still putting into the banks, even though we're paying negative 1% interest at this point, or negative 0.75, depending on what your setup is, people are still putting money into the banks. The challenge for me is if I'm losing basically 8.54%, it's like telling my boss, hey, can you give me a reverse raise? Pay me less money. And if I still have money in the bank from years past, I'm taking a time machine back in time and telling my boss, please make sure to pay me 10% less almost from those days. I don't know about you guys, but I'm ready to get out of that system. It doesn't feel like it's very rewarding, and I'm not sure when that's going to change over, but I have a feeling that we're well overdue. So in marketing, we call this brand switching. The idea of changing from one product to another that offers you something better. And we've all done it in our lives. We've all seen different aspects of it, whether it's in technology or food or whatever the case is. Internet Explorer for Chrome, 3 to Oyster, whatever the case is. What causes us to stop and decide whether or not we're ready to switch? Well, the biggest one is the low value to money ratio. If I feel like I'm losing money at something, then I'm going to move. Ultimately, bad service, outdated technology, brand fatigue, needs are shifting, new opportunities, trends, whatever. Where have we seen this before, and where has it worked out in different ways? 2008, your boy graduated right around that time, the height of the economic recession. There were no jobs. I wish I could have worked at one of these places. But the idea was basically the market was so toxic that these players popped up because there was an opportunity. Hey, you got extra assets laying around, i.e. a house or a car? You can use those and make a little extra money. You don't like paying long distance calls and services and buying one of those stupid phone cards? No problem, I got you hooked up. These were things that came because there was an opportunity. And I found by asking a lot of my Danish colleagues and a lot of friends, why are you not buying into this? And in many cases, I think Gordon Gekko, even though he's kind of a douche, had a really interesting perspective on it. I'd like to share that. And for those that don't know, he was the guy that The Wolf of Wall Street was based off of.
Try to regulate blockchain and crypto, yes, and I think that's a great thing. And for anyone that really knows the financial markets well, what you can do is look back in history every time the government regulates something, an asset. It doesn't go down in value. It goes up massively in value. Case in point, when I was first getting down to Wall Street in the late 80s, it was junk bonds. And when junk bonds finally became regulated, everyone's like, oh, that's it. It's over, the party's over. The government's regulating junk bonds, selling. Guess what happened? The market went up 100-fold. 100-fold. Why? Because once the regulations are in place, institutional money will pour into an asset class. Right now, the amount of institutional money, yeah, they've started to adopt, but it's nothing. Do I think they're going to try to regulate blockchain?
Super interesting. So perhaps if government steps in and starts regulating, that might calm a lot of people's nerves and say, well, if the government is basically accepted as this being a real thing, maybe it is. And there's a number of reasons that that might not be the case, or it might be, but if you do a quick Google search for the top countries that are adopting cryptocurrencies, it is a blend of developed and developing countries. Look at the top two, Ukraine and Russia. Why do you think they're using it? Because obviously you can't know for certain whether or not whatever you're throwing down on the counter for a piece of bread is going to be worth the same thing tomorrow. And I think there might be a case for why that could be a thing for many different assets that we all own right now. So moving into decentralized and decentralization opportunities, I'd like to cover a couple of quick things that I think are really unique and interesting and in their own rights. So crypto is not just buying an asset and holding on to it and hoping that it goes up tomorrow. Like, why the fuck would anybody do that? That's crazy to me. Like, that's not how it works. So I'd like to introduce a couple of quick things that totally make sense. How many people have heard of staking? Cool, good number of people. So this is an idea where basically you are putting your money into either a flexible, locked, or savings account, at which case you get nice amounts of interest back for just letting it sit. You're loaning your coins out for the greater good. In some cases, these are newer coins, you could get 100% APY, which is basically stacking interest. So within a year's time, you're doubling your money. Where does that exist in any bank, in any type of asset class? I'm not familiar with it, except for crypto. So there's a way to stake stable coins. There's also a way, so stable coins are basically coins that are based on the US dollar. And I don't see them going up more than a cent or down a cent. And the idea is that, hey, if I wanted to stake that, I could make 24%. There are incentives built into these programs because everybody wants to get somebody in the door. Right? It's the same reason why the banks are like, hey, we'll give you an extra $100 you open up a bank account with us. Same thing, but at much bigger levels. We can all do this with our own money. This is called DeFi. And there are plenty of amazing exchanges that you can drop your money into, or your stable coins, or even some of the newer coins, and do many different things with them, whether it's trading and swapping, or one of my favorites, yield farming. Liquidity pools are basically the idea of pairing two different assets together and allowing them to be staked. And this is lots of other people basically doing the same thing at the same time. It is super interesting, and this is one of my favorites. It's also off of Near Protocol. They're called ref finance. And one layer on top of that is yield farming. So you're basically making money off of the interest of pairing coins together. This is next level shit. I made 20 grand in 3 months. Like the US dollars, not kroner. So like, and nobody from the tax community is here. But the idea is like, this is crazy. Like, where else are you getting that? And I'd like to go into a couple of different things, but it all begins with getting on an exchange. So these are the most well-known exchanges. They're popping up every day. I would go on one that is well-known, and these are the most well-known ones. I mean, they buy out stadiums at this point. So before I get too far and sound like the crazy Homer Simpson person, I'd like to address something that most people end up coming back on that haven't understood exactly the difference between proof of stake and proof of work. So everybody that I've met, for some reason, is like, yeah, but crypto's bad for the environment. It's like, yeah, okay, but crazy grandma also said that like you'll get cancer from cooking food in the microwave. Or don't sit too close to the TV, it'll ruin your eyes. I don't know if that one's true, I don't think it is. But there's a big fucking difference between the ones that are bad for the environment, proof of work, these are the old coins, and the ones that are super efficient, and that's proof of stake. These are 1,000 times more efficient, and this is where the direction of everything is going. Sorry, the podium is in the way. But there's a big difference. So real quick, proof of work is basically, let's just pretend it's a bunch of nerds, but it's computers in a room that are trying to solve puzzles. These puzzles are transactions that are basically meant to be paired up. And then the first one to solve a bunch of these puzzles at once gets a reward, which is 6.25 Bitcoin, or 2,48,000. Why can't I say that? That's the deal. So you don't get a little fraction of it if you have a bunch of miners. You either win or you lose. That's the game. And these things are the worst fucking thing for the environment, by the way. These things are built in giant palaces like this, these giant warehouses. They're usually out in poor places that don't have a lot of high expenses for electricity, and this is the problem. These are people that basically, it's 4 times the annual power usage of Denmark to operate these at scale, and these are conservative estimates. Like, it doesn't make sense to continue to do the proof of work concept. But the reason that we hold on to Bitcoin is the same reason that this shit is a thing. Fancy wine that's $2,000 per sniff, I don't know. Or fancy diamonds, because it's a rock out of the ground that everybody wants to have. Or even gold for that matter. There's a lot of stuff that goes into scarcity and the idea of it. That's why NFTs right now are really kicking off. And sometimes, yeah, there's historical precedents for this. But yeah, honestly, like sometimes people are just stupid and we want what we want. It's crazy. Proof of stake is super interesting. And this is where things are going. These are where most new coins are sitting. This is basically allowing individuals or groups of computers that are owned by individual people to have an elected process or some type of process that isn't a super competitive space where only the rich that can afford the highest level of technology to run enough of these transactions actually wins. This is not that. So basically you can make money on transactions. That's why staking is a thing. You loan your money to make these transactions. It's far less expensive. There's more nodes. It's just better overall. Cool. So I'm sure that there'll be questions on that. I got to move on because I want to cover the 3 layers of blockchain. There's a difference between the different levels of blockchain, and I feel like that's sometimes the thing that it just goes over people's heads. So the first one is a base layer. These are the most popular crypto solutions that most people know of. The second one is basically something that allows for these different layers to talk to each other. And the third one is an application layer, something that is practical, that has utility to go with it. The reality is 78% of all revenue, all money that's getting slushed around is just stuck in layer 1. It's people buying coins and hoping that it's going to go up tomorrow, which is crazy. It doesn't make any sense. So I'd like to show what this ecosystem actually looks like using a little bit more of a metaphor. So let's say I own coal, and coal is now a cryptocurrency, whatever, fuck it. But it's how we produce energy. And the process for producing energy is mining, extraction, transport, stockpiling, shipping, and then the customers that buy it use it for power plants, steam engines, retail, and then you can either make light or cool things down, ship stuff, or make delicious hot dogs. You could also do the same with, let's say, oil and gas, and there's a process for making that. There's customers, and you have petrol, plastic manufacturers, chemical manufacturers, gas and power. Let's say we're just focused on uranium, and there's a process for that, and there's customers, and there's results. I'm going to use this to metaphorically represent what layer 2 is, because I think a lot of people miss that. So let's say I have coal in my wallet, and I have a super pimped out old Cadillac. I don't know what I would do with that, but let's say I have that. The idea is that I need to change out coal for oil and gas in order to put it into that vehicle. That is the job of layer 2s. Layer 2s allow these things to switch over. Now there's lots of different nuances to that, and I'm not going to go into super deep detail because I'll put everybody to sleep, but just understand that these are basically the way to transact and push these things over. So let's say I have nuclear in my wallet, I need to change it out for gas, and now I have an automobile, and the automobile is basically the purpose, the utility. This can be used to do drive-bys or go pick up grandma or whatever the case is. These are the utilities. This stuff hasn't even been built because the railroads don't exist. There's no version of roads. It's all so new, and it's happening right now. These are called dApps, decentralized applications. dApps in the States is when you give some dude like a really cool handshake or whatever, but I like the idea of dApps either way. So think of distributed databases. Think of everyone has access to see all of these different transactions, and no changes are ever allowed. You're talking about getting rid of fraud at scale. And one of the most interesting exercises that I did was go into my own phone and try to look through and see what was going to be affected by Web3. And literally every 5th picture was something that could potentially be completely changed if it was on this type of network. We're talking about food waste. We're talking about recycling, IDs, online shopping, internet connections. I mean, the list is endless. You're welcome to go through your phone and see the same things that I did. It's all subject to change, and it's all happening at scale. As soon as some of these companies realize that they're actually making more money by running this, that's when it's game over. And ultimately, here's what I'm focused on as somebody that's running an accelerator, is I want to get fucking grandma on the blockchain. As soon as you create a user experience that is so flawless, so easy, and so much better than what currently exists, then it's game over. And that's one of the hardest things, especially when you get a ton of really brilliant people in the room, is they make it super complicated and impossible for the average person to step in and do. So again, I run near Nordic. It's an accelerator. We have a ton of different modules. I don't know, it's shameless promotions. So I'm going to quickly go through a couple of real case scenarios just to kind of mull things over, and then I'll jump into the last little bit here. So let's say you run a big shipping company that rhymes with Nersk, and the goal is that you want to figure out, how am I supposed to use this fancy Web3 thing? And it's like, cool, what about predictive maintenance? Predictive maintenance is knowing exactly when certain parts need to be serviced or when they actually fail. The cost of one of those ships going sideways in the Suez Canal is a giant problem for the rest of the world. We all saw it. It was something that happened to us. So the idea is using a blockchain solution to basically predict when and how these things need to be solved is a matter of setting it up and getting it together. One of our closest friends with some of the guys I know in the back, we have a buddy who is spending morning, noon, and night on the phone making sure that these different ships are dropping off at the right times and the right points. If there was a higher incentive to pick up more things of a certain type at a certain port and drop it off, that would change the entire industry. Or let's say maybe, I don't know, there's an outbreak of mad cow, God forbid. If we can't trace back where it came from, or maybe you have Louis Vuitton purses that are being dropped off in New York, and it's like, hey, these things aren't even real. Where did that come from? All of a sudden we can trace it back and see like, well, provenance, like that guy who dropped it off over there was dropping off fake stuff. You guys get the idea. Cool. I'm going to skip ahead on NFTs because I thought you did a great job on that. Let me go through on the last couple of things. So it is a lot harder to build a business on this infrastructure because it doesn't exist right now. And there are so many things that are different and therefore harder. And I found that you need to figure out what good looks like. And it's really hard to find that. I've always found that taking inspiration from others is what it's all about. And it's very hard to find that in general within Web3, which means it's early. The other side of it is if you want to get involved in this, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. So like you can step into a room and be like, oh yeah, blockchain, sure, I know all about it. And most people aren't really going to call your bluff. It's crazy, and I meet them on a very regular basis. The other side of it is like, it's totally different marketing. We're talking completely different channels that operate in totally different ways. And the way that you reach people is not from the last 20 years, it's from the last 5. So we're talking about a very different way of working. I think the last thing, I took a quote from a really interesting video that I was watching, because you have an entire movement that's led purely by developers that are either using Rust or Solidity or a handful of other solutions. But it's basically that sometimes the most brilliant people in the room don't come up with the best answers. So because they understand one very complex thing, programming with cryptography, that all other complicated things must be lesser in complexity and naturally lower in the hierarchy of reality, which is this expert fallacy of basically assuming because I know how to develop, I can solve all problems. This is going to be a UX, UI, and development problem. And I do think that it's a completely different case for the way that people own some of these things. You cannot, as somebody that owns a token, have the founding team or a VC owning 50%. And I have a very brief video on that, and then I'll conclude with a couple of things.
If you look at what is crypto and what is crypto investing, often what you're doing is you're building crypto networks that are token powered and token incentivized, and they're effectively markets that are trying to replace corporations, right? You're trying to take the corporation and replace it with some sort of marketplace. In that sort of a distributed system, you can't have concentration of ownership. So like, in a traditional business, you want to buy at least 15% of it, maybe 20% at a time, and double down over subsequent rounds. And by the time the thing IPOs, hopefully you own 20 or 25 or more of it, right? And a traditional VC is really effective this. In a distributed system and a distributed network, if you own 20% of the network, your liability to the resilience of the network, the entire value proposition is that distributed ownership makes the network resilient. So we actually, like in our case, we try to not own more than 5%. And often we're talking about like low single-digit percentages of ownership in these networks. Crazy. Because that's actually the right way to have resiliency in these systems and to incentivize the community to come in and actually adopt them. So if you have too much VC ownership, the community will just reject you, right? So it's sort of like organ rejection, or, it's an immune response.
It's a very controversial way of looking at things, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. So the last thing that I want to leave with is more of an interesting perspective of why now is the most interesting time to be a part of this based off of historical events of growth. And I think, honestly, this video does such a great job articulating it that I would just prefer to play the video rather than me rant and rave. You guys have heard enough of that.
Okay, this is now the fastest adoption of any technology in all recorded human history. The internet from 1990 to 2000 grew at 63% a year. That was the fastest adoption of any technology in all recorded history. Prior to that, mobile phones was the other one. But what happens is the internet technology and the mobile phone technology allows for these networks to be built. And once that network's in place, it's faster to build the next network. So in India, for example, they've just basically given out free data to every mobile phone in India. So guess what? Data usage is the highest in the world. And so their internet scaling becomes faster. So the internet was huge, as we all know, and it remains huge. So at 63% a year, it then flattened out over time as more and more people got adopted. So at 1997, it was growing at 63% a year, and there was 140 million users of the internet. In 2021, there are 140 million crypto users, and it's growing at 113% a year. Jeez. Double the speed. Now, this is where humans struggle. Linear numbers and exponential numbers. Because it's exponential, it means that growing at 113% a year, we're going to go from 140 million people to 1 billion people by 2024. So if you know that something is being adopted at this speed, and it's a networking of money at its core, and you can buy an infinitesimal fraction of it, so everybody can buy 10% of their net worth, then everybody who takes this opportunity will probably have the biggest opportunity in history. You start with understanding money, which most of us don't think about. then you kind of understand how we're getting screwed by central bank printing and the debt-laden economy and what it means. And then you start saying, oh, okay, but that's Bitcoin, and then what's this Ethereum business? And then you start realizing decentralized finance, and you're like, it's kind of a finance thing, but that's kind of cool, because I can get yields now. You know, I can get, instead of getting 0 on my bank account for my hard savings, I can now get 6% a year. Wow, that's a difference. It's like going back 25 years in time. And then suddenly NFTs come, and community tokens, and suddenly your mind is completely blown that this is not just money. It's the entire exchange, transfer, and storage of value for the internet. Whole business models are about to change massively because of what this technology unlocks. And then once you get your head around that, you're like, oh God, I can't even hold this in my mind any longer, it's so big. And that it's not just buy some Bitcoin, I'm going to make some money over time. You know, it's actually an entirely parallel financial system and business structure for the world. And it's being adopted faster than anything we can ever imagine.
That's the idea. Pretty powerful stuff, if you ask me. And we all are kind of seeing that right now, and the data does support these numbers, which again is baffling and very difficult to kind of wrap your head around. But the idea of the entire exchange, transfer, storage of value across every potential new business model and new businesses and services that pop out of it isn't something that we've really seen before. And completely new models that didn't exist in the past are now here for potentially anybody that wants to play with them. And the last thing that I'll leave people with is, it's an old quote, I love it. It's basically, when is the best time to plant a tree? And the simple answer is the best time was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. So I hope this was valuable. I appreciate everybody coming out. I realize that there was a lot of information here. I'm going to stick around. There is a ton of alcohol and there are pizzas on the way. So thank you for coming out. And yeah, we'll see you again real soon.